I've taken care on this channel before to make clear that there is a straight line leading from the hate groups of the early 20th century into the hate groups of the beginning of the 21st century. What do I mean by that? If you go from the alt-right back to the silent majority, back to the Christian evangelicals, if you go from the alt-right to the Tea Party, if you go back to the Goldwater campaign in the 1960s, if you go even further than that, back to Lucky Lindy and the America First non-interventionist movement that popped up in defense of Adolf Hitler in the 1930s, in the lead up to the Second World War, you will find a lot of the same players, a lot of the same financiers, a lot of the same organizers, a lot of the same protesters involved in the white nationalist movement, the nativist movement, the so-called libertarian movement that seems to mostly be just a bunch of aggrieved white men who started to believe in liberty once the United States government started taking corrective action in favor of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. If you examine the Barry Goldwater campaign in the 1960s, it was the definitive shift for the Republican Party towards white nationalism. Many of the people interviewed on the Nazi YouTube channel Red Ice TV will talk about how their road to white nationalism led through American libertarianism, the Southern strategy of the Republican Party, which led out with Richard Nixon and into Ronald Reagan, and arguably into George W. Bush's campaign, which did have some racial undertones. Bush definitely statistically had more support, particularly in 2004, from non-white evangelical voters. I think that the Bush administration, Bush Jr., was much better about making the Republican Party a broad tent, right? You didn't see a lot of... You saw the same white nationalists that hated Barack Obama, hated George W. Bush. It was the same loose change, conspiracy theory stuff. And I'm not saying that George Bush was a progressive by any means, but he was certainly a center-right liberal. Yeah, he's conservative on the American spectrum, but more, thinking globally, W was a Western liberal. Okay, his nationalism and his xenophobia wasn't about skin color necessarily. There was some very moderate dog whistling. I think most of the racism of the Bush administration was perpetuated by omission, sins of omission, ignoring and disregarding the problems of the black community. With that aside, if you follow the timeline, if you follow the timeline of white nationalism in the United States, you will hear the name Regnery. You will hear the name William Regnery the First, who was the number one funder of the anti-Semitic pro-Nazi America First movement in the 1930s. You will hear the name of William Regnery II, who funds the existing anti-Semitic white nationalist movement today. The godfather of the alt-right, William Regnery II, is the number one funder of the movement. He is the mastermind. He is the Dr. Frankenstein behind this monster that is Richard Spencer. The the history of the alt-right's money is very much so steeped in mainstream conservatism. It is very much so steeped in mainstream libertarianism. We had Christopher Cantwell arrested the other day, and Christopher Cantwell is a Nazi who came upon his politics originally running as a Tea Partier in New Hampshire, running on the Libertarian ticket. When people have spoken with William Regnery II, he uses the language of the NAP, the non-aggression principle. He uses libertarian language. He talks about how enthusiastically he supported the campaign of Barry Goldwater, which was very militantly for states' rights, which was the Barry Goldwater campaign was in favor of preserving segregation in the southern states, which is all, the alt-right has all this branding to obfuscate what they are. The alt-right are standard issue American segregationists with out-of-date hipster clothing on and more explicit tipping of the hat to Hitler. So American segregationists, as a mainstream person would imagine a segregationist, is the Klan, is a red, white, and blue apple pie racist. What the alt-right does is rebrand the podunk style of hillbilly white nationalism, and they rebrand it as being couture Europeanism. This kind of what did Spencer say? Pan white nationalism, this idea of white people all over the world, whatever that means, whatever the fuck white people means, because the alt-right is so shitty, the alt-right is so bad about making the distinction. These are very important distinctions, and this is where infighting will come later. Just, nationalism, race, and ethnicity are not unified. White, at its most accurate, is just a description of skin color. It has nothing to do with Europe. Whiteness does not have anything to do with there are no white nations. There has never been a white nation. There have been apartheid states. There have been segregated states, but there is no country that was that was completely segregated, meaning that you had segregation in America, but you never had a country that was exclusively people of the white race in an authoritarian sense. So, why is it so important to me that Bill Regnery is the Pope of white nationalism in the United States? What sort of is very important about Regnery is that he takes what you would have read in Mein Kampf and then filters it through, and this is how it has a potential to really go mainstream. And I know that Trump seems mainstream, but Cantwell in that Vice documentary made a very specific distinction. The gold standard of white nationalism is anti-Semitism. And Trump has failed the litmus test of anti-Semitism by allowing his daughter Ivanka to marry Jared Kushner. Not only to marry Jared Kushner, but for him to most recently push out the explicit white nationalists in his group and shift into an administration that favors neoconservatives being Bush-era Republicans that are pro-war and pro-deregulation of business and the stock market and stuff. There happen to be neoconservatives who are thought leaders that are Jewish. That's happenstance. But to the alt-right, neoconservatism is a Jewish conspiracy to control America, and blah, 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 blah. The standard Pizzagate style paranoia that is involved in white nationalism's obsession with the malignant Jew conspiracy. So Trump failed the test of pure white nationalism. He is a bigot. He is a bigot in name and deed. But what Bill Regnery is proposing, the next wave after Trump and the neoliberals are done robbing this country blind, in the ashes of neoconservatism, from the ashes of neoliberalism, Bill Regnery's kingdom, his utopia, his promised land of true white nationalism, will be brought to prominence, and it will be wrapped in the American language of liberty.